Early voting in Louisiana is record-breaking, almost tripling the number of votes cast in 2016. Election Day is now just 2 weeks away, and that got Tan Trung thinking about the significance of that time frame, especially in a year like this one. Tan puts 2 weeks into focus tonight.
2 weeks before the presidential election, most early voters in Orleans and Jefferson parishes are choosing their side.
I'm afraid of socialism, and with Donald Trump until the virus, we had a booming economy. I'm just dependent on that to come back again.
We should not have people like that govern us and making decisions about our lives.
I think people are pretty firm about who they're voting for at this point. I don't know what could happen in the next 2 weeks that would change people who are undecided. I really don't.
But 2020 has been full of surprises.
Oh, it sure has. It hasn't stopped.
2020 sure hasn't stopped. In this year dominated by the pandemic, so much can be measured and so much can take place in 2 weeks. It usually takes about 2 weeks after exposure for someone to show symptoms of the coronavirus. If you test positive, it's 2 weeks of quarantine. Looking back, the 2 weeks after Mardi Gras became life-changing, and for some victims of COVID-19, those weeks were life-ending. Depending on the time of year, 2 weeks could bring dramatic drops or spikes in flattening the curve, a phrase that almost seems dated.
Arguably, many of us have become much more aware of the value of 2 weeks' worth of pay. Many of us have gone through furloughs this year. In fact, workers at City Hall are going through that right now.
Ask the thousands of families who've waited in line at food distributions what 2 weeks of groceries mean to them. Renters and landlords alike would certainly welcome 2 weeks of rent at this point.
A lot can change in 2 weeks. You know, nowadays you never know what kind of crazy news is going to come out and change things. You never knew that the president was going to test positive for COVID, and that changed things.
More than 2 weeks after the president tested positive, we arrive here, 2 weeks from Election Day. For many voters, the stakes couldn't be higher. Our health, the economy, our democracy, to name just a few. And while these voters may have different political views, many of them have one concern in common, that the election may be disputed. And if that happens, then history tells us that may take more than 2 weeks to settle. Tan Trung, Eyewitness News.